Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode. Today we are going to discuss how to take complex cultural structures and include them in your books.
Or at least how much of it you actually need to include.
Yes. So what brought this up is I like a good political story. I like a tale of court intrigue and resolving things through political structures. And as such, in my books, I've written a complex political structure, including the use of sashes and sash duels, and you can resolve political differences. Like if your honor is insulted, you can take off your tassels off your sash and hold them up and say, I challenge you to a duel, and you can risk your sash or stand recused of your lying bastard. Words to that effect. But the only reason I could use those is for the same reason that there are some insults you can only give in some cultures. And specifically, if I cast my mind back to a LARP I once played it, we were all playing samurai. And one of the characters sat down at the table and took her chopsticks and put them into their food like this. Now, in the culture, in the fantasy culture, that's where we were playing these samurai, if you put your chopsticks upright like that in the food bowl, you are implying that the host has poisoned the food. You're saying this bowl is poisoned. So the host has tried to kill me. So the entire LARP reacted with this like indrawn breath of horror, right? Because we all knew that was a shared experience.
Right.
But you cannot do that if you have not defined those kinds of cultural structures.
Or at least you think you can't.
Okay. Hit me with it.
Well, so we get into this all the time in my writing group because, again, it's my writing group. So most of the people there are writing fantasy. It's what kind of why we hang out together. When I say younger writers, I don't mean younger in age. I mean younger in the craft.
Yeah.
So you can always tell the younger writers that are just getting into fantasy because they tend to really info dump heavy. They and I get it. I get what you're thinking. The thought process is if I don't give this information to the reader, they're never going to understand it. So like last night, this one guy read a piece where he had this game. Basically, there was a thief that stole from a nobleman. He was caught. He was brought to the nobleman, and the nobleman was like, I haven't had a good game of this. It's sort of like Othello or Go, it's kind of in that vein. But he's like, I haven't had a good game of this. Play me a game, and if you entertain me, I will just let you go.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then we'll kill you just like we were going to do anyway because you stole from me.
Yeah.
Now he's got to play this game, and it's a game only noblemen play in this guy's world. But peasants watch it, they're interested, so they will spectate. And so he spectated this before. But unfortunately, what the author did was he just info dumped several paragraphs of all the rules. Like, here's the rules of the game. And now let's sit down and play. And I'm like, this is bad. This is not good. And he's like, well, how else are they going to understand it? So first of all, maybe this kid doesn't know the actual rules. You're in his head. So have him go, okay, wait. Because it was broke up in 2 rounds. And the first round lasted for 4 turns. And you could put 4 pieces down in each round. And then after that, you could only do 1 piece. And I'm like, okay, because that's in the rules. He spelled them out for us in this little mini rule book, in the prose. And I'm like, have the nobleman go, why don't you take the first move? And then in his mind go, okay, pretty sure I can put down 4 pieces in the opening move. And I think that happens for a couple turns. I don't remember how many. And then have him, do it. And so now we're thinking, we're in his head, we're thinking about him remembering this stuff. It's more organic. We get to watch him play this game and all of that. And so there's just, again, it's just thinking differently. It's changing the mindset of, and that goes for all world building, you know.
So there I completely agree with you. And I have sympathy for your game guy, because I did the same thing. Like in The Hidden Blade, when I wrote, I can't even remember which chapter it was, but in one of the chapters, the main character goes to a gambling house and he's going to play a dice game, basically to blackmail somebody into giving him information. I took 3 paragraphs and described how a dice game's rules were. Thankfully, I caught it on the edit. I did catch it in the edit, and it is now just an organic, like he just plays the dice and the reader catches up.
Yeah. and so this is where it actually needs to start. So this is what I told him. I said, really, when you're dealing with this, because like we've got 2 things here. We've got these games, but then we've got your little sash duel that's actually integral to the politics and the story and some of the thematic elements and stuff like that. And so that's where I actually say that you have to start. You have to start by asking the question, is this social complexity that I'm about to add into this story, does it drive the story plot thematic elements or not? So like in the case of the game does not drive the complexity or drive the story, the plot, the thematic elements. Whereas with the sash duel, or even like your story with the chopsticks going into the bowl of rice, that does have much more impactful things. So that's the first thing I have to. And the reason why I asked that question is because then that really kind of defines what I need to think about as I'm organically, because both of them have to be threaded organically. You can't go, well, it's integral to the plot, so I'm just going to info dump. No, don't info dump. Like that's off the table. That goes away. If you're going to write immersively and you're going to write it well, that's gone. But really, you know, the reason why I differentiate between the two is if the game has nothing to do with anything, I can really make it esoteric and just make it interesting. Because that's really the only goal now for me. If I'm forcing the readers to watch a game, then I just and the game has nothing to do with anything, then I'm just going to make it really interesting. I'm going to make whatever so that it's an enjoyable moment to read, and I'm not going to worry about the rules, and I'm not going to worry about the strategy and all this other stuff, because it doesn't do anything for the story. And so why waste the time on it? Just make it interesting. It adds flair to your world, because, oh, they have gambling games. I have gambling games. Their world must be like mine, you know, and it gives them that kind of moment. But on the flip side, if it is something that drives, because like in Genesis, there is a game. There's a game that is a real game. Like I actually sell it. It's a real, actual physical game called Barca that not only is in the fantasy world, but also you can physically own and play the actual game. It's a really cool strategy game, but the main players are a part of these pieces. And so all of this is forgotten when the story takes place. So you have these pieces that don't mean anything to the characters. You know, there's a dragon type piece, and there's a this type piece and a that type piece, and they, you know, the characters understand the game and they play the game, so they just play it, but they don't understand the significance of where the history of this game came from until much later in the story when this stuff unfolds. And so the game means more to me in my story. However, it's still just a freaking game. So I don't want to just info dump the rules and info dump. I mean, if you buy the game, it comes with the rule book, and you know, you can read the rules so you can play the game. But in the story, it's not about that. It's still not about the rules. It's so even when they're playing the game during it, you know, there's moments where the game gets played during the novel series. It's still more esoteric. It's still not just a ground, like, here's all the rules. Like, I don't do that because everybody knows how to play it in this world. And so they just play it. And then there's always some other thematic element or some other conflict that I'm doing in addition to the game. There's some other thing going on. And so that's the thing you have to think about. And it really is about the organics, but there's a bigger answer to that. It also comes into world building. Back in the 70s, every fantasy novel started with 2 or 3 chapters of the world, this encyclopedia. And I know what they were thinking. They're like, I have to give this information. If they don't know about the magic sword and the scrolls and the prophecy and the, you know, the 3 kings and the, you know, Lord of the Rings starts this way. It's like, you know, there were 9 rings and this did this and for this, for those and this, like, you don't need any of that. none of that is needed for the story, because the reality is, and again, it's weird how a lot of the things we discuss on Thursday literally happen in my, get brought up in my Wednesday night meeting. But we talked about this one person, a different person, was kind of introducing this new world. It's kind of like a hell, but almost like a void area as well. And so, she read it, and my comment was, you can't ground me to a void. Like, I don't care. And so she's throwing all these technical world building terms at me that I've never heard before, and all this stuff and everything. She's like, oh, but you'll eventually learn how important this is. And I'm like, no, I won't, because I'm gonna put the book down.
Yeah.
I'm never going to eventually learn anything.
Yeah.
There's a character in the middle of this void. Ground me to them. Yeah. Ground me to them. Make me care about them. Make me care about why they're in the void, and then bring these void elements in and all this stuff, because then I care. And so it's the same thing, with your world building. It's about grounding me to something I actually give a crap about, which is almost always not always, there are a few exceptions, but it's almost always your narrating character.
Yep. That's
what you have to ground me to first. And then allow me to learn the world organically, and I'll care about it. If you dump a 3-chapter encyclopedia on me, I don't give a crap. I don't give a crap about any of it. I want to be grounded in a character.
But if you are going to use games or deals or complex political structures to resolve conflicts, you don't need to have, the reader doesn't need it, right? But you, the writer,
actually,
I better know how that shit works.
Actually, I will disagree a little bit, because you didn't say that earlier when we were discussing this topic offline. I think the reader does know. I think you can only, and I say this in my magic class, with magic, you can only use magic to resolve conflicts if it has been developed and explained to the reader at a level where it's become a tool. And it's the same thing in all aspects, politics, the whole 9 yards. Otherwise, as we've discussed, it becomes Deus Ex Machina.
And that brings up a very interesting juxtaposition, which is Tolkien versus Sanderson.
Specifically Mistborn.
Yeah, specifically Mistborn. So in Mistborn, you have a highly defined magic system, completely unambiguous. So you can use it to solve all your problems. You can use it to solve every single conflict.
It's a sword. Reader understands it. We can use it. We don't feel cheated and gypped for it.
But your politics of Mistborn, and I don't know, there might be Mistborn fans out there who give me heat for this. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, Mistborn's politics are elementary. And there is very little definition.
So one thing I didn't tell you when we were pre-discussing this, Mistborn's actually, the first book is actually my favorite fantasy book.
Yeah. I enjoy it as a book. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying.
The series is not my favorite series.
No.
But the first Mistborn book is it literally gave me everything I look for as a fantasy fan.
Yeah.
I freaking loved that book.
But
you're right. So the government, unfortunately, there's a guy who lives forever, and he rules with an iron fist.
It's very elementary. There's no layers to it, which means that, so what it allows Sanderson to do is to tell his whole, if you have not read Mistborn, this is a spoiler, it tells his whole revolution arc, because he can't solve the revolution with politics, therefore he must use magic.
Right.
Tolkien is the exact opposite.
Well, and just to finish that up, I also think that's the reason why it's a single point. So when you have, that's something that I struggle with all the time as a story creator, because sometimes some of my stories are these massive things. If you have an entire government with millions of people that are, in millions of locations doing millions of different things, how do you overthrow that? As opposed to, you've got one guy that lives forever and he controls everything personally.
Well, so there are ways.
Well, of course, but I'm just saying, from a storytelling standpoint, when you have a limited amount of time in one novel to get this thing done, it's why do we blow up the Death Star in Star Wars?
Sure.
Because it's very finite. It's this one villain that we have to deal with, this one thing, and we save the world because we blew up this one thing. And then we find out that they've actually made, they make them all the time. So it's like, well, that's weird. One of the things that a lot of people fall into the trap of is they simplify these big concepts so that they can actually overcome that one simple thing in this one way. And
but because Sanderson does that whole thing, the whole thing feels very simplistic. His political plot feels very simplistic, right? Especially to a student of history. Like, if I think of all of the things that went into the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, to name all of the revolutions in the Age of Revolution, there is a lot of history there. There is complex movements of information, how thinking changed, the decisions taken by previous governments. It's a lot. And then you boil it down to, I'm going to shoot the bad guy.
Right. I'm going to shoot that one guy and save the world. I'm going to blow up that one Death Star and save the world. So yeah, that's a trap that storytellers can fall into, because you do need to have some type of resolution. You do need to have some type of clean, look at Total Recall. Like, I'm going to put my fingers in this handprint and I'm going to save the world. Like, we can boil it down to this one event that does this overcome. And sometimes you have to.
But now, sure, absolutely. But now Tolkien did the other thing. Okay? So Tolkien's magic system, as we've discussed previously, is it's butter on toast. It's
as ambiguous as you can get.
Yeah, it's completely ambiguous.
It's magic because it's magic.
Yes. But Tolkien's complexity of interaction between the cultures and their governments is incredibly well defined. He has the fires that are supposed to call, the horse people, the Rorarim, to Gondor. He has governmental structures for each of those cultures, which is why Grima Wormtongue can have such an impact on the horse lords. And Tolkien can use politics to overcome.
And it doesn't have to be human politics. Look at the meeting of the Ettins or the Treants or whatever they were called. And when Merry and Pippin went there and they called the council.
The ghosts.
Meeting. The ghosts.
Those ghosts, ignore the fact that they're magical. The reason why they could be called was because of politics.
Yeah.
It was because of politics and history.
Basically, to tie that up, we can use politics because the readers understand it. We use politics and all of those things to resolve conflicts, but we can't use magic. Yeah. But now we can go to the tip of that pyramid that we've created. With Mistborn being one bottom corner, Lord of the Rings being the other bottom corner. The Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan does both.
Yes, it does.
You know everything you need to know about the magic. You know everything you need to know about governments and histories of governments and wars and just all sorts of crazy things and everything from just everything. It's all encompassing. I mean, it's 16 novels, so it's crazy, massive, huge. But yes, that now we use politics to resolve conflicts. We use magic to resolve conflicts. We use all this stuff because we have given all this information to the readers and they understand how all of this stuff works. And so therefore we can do it.
We use religion to resolve conflicts as well.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter if you define
social contract, what social contract you're bringing into the story. If it still falls down that path, if it's ambiguous, you can't use it to resolve, it's just there. It's kind of window dressing at that point. The more you define it, the more your ability to use it. Otherwise, and just to make sure that everybody understands what I mean by that, I call it the 400 foot of rope phenomenon. And I call it this because a long time ago, I was reading an unpublished piece of work, and this happened. It was about 2/3 through the book. The hero ended up being trapped on this cliff that was 400 foot tall, and there was absolutely no way off. He was stranded. The story was over, and the writer actually wrote, luckily, he remembered to bring 400 foot of rope. Now, never has this rope been mentioned. No idea where he kept it. And also, wow, you brought the exact amount of rope for the exact height of the cliff that you're trapped on. That's pretty freaking amazing. So I've dubbed it the 400 foot of rope phenomenon from then on out. And that's just basically where you just, you have this thing come out, and Deus Ex Machina, if you want to use that, I call it the 400-foot of rope phenomenon, where you just have this thing that is the perfect solution for this, but it's never been mentioned, it's never a part of it. And what the reader does is they feel cheated. They literally, they don't feel like, oh, look how clever this writer is. They go, oh wow, that was cheesy as crap. And so if you use politics, religion, magic, society, whatever, if it comes out of nowhere and it hasn't been defined, if they don't understand how it operates and how it can actually impact the story, then you're just pulling it out of your booty, and no one's going to enjoy that. And so you just can't.
I fully agree with that, but you should still avoid infodump. When I wrote my Sash deal, like I put these little insets on top of my chapters. So when I wrote my Sash deal, I did have a paragraph up there that spoke about a nobleman's ability to challenge using his sash, but I didn't go into detail of it. It's part of the bardic lore flavor text for the chapter.
Right. And flavor text, one of the reasons why they are used in fantasy and sci-fi so much is they are little cheats. Yeah. There are these little things you can do, and nobody goes, oh, look at that cheating, dirty little writer there. It's just these things. And again, I think no one used it better than Sanderson in Mistborn. Like, the flavor text is the story, and everything else is the afterthought. Like, that's the crazy thing about when you read Mistborn. Every one of those flavor texts throughout the entire thing are literally the only thing you need to read and pay attention to. Nothing else matters. All the rest of it is the flavor text. And those little paragraphs at the beginning of every chapter are literally the story. And so I thought, I was just blown away by that. That was just so brilliant the way he did it. But yeah,
so you can use those little things on top of chapters as little flavor text as a little bit of an info dump, at least to kind of set the scene.
It's also why I don't use them at all.
Yeah,
sure. I've never used them ever.
I like them. I do.
And no, again, I've seen them used really, really well, and they are. But it's one of the reasons why, because I know it's a crutch, I don't use it. Now, that being said, I do cheat because my chapter titles are very important to me. And so they are always this 1 or 2 word statement. And the funny thing is that they're also written in the prose. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in that chapter, the title of the chapter is also written. Sometimes it's in dialogue, sometimes it's in monologue, sometimes it's in narration, but never as a chat. So I really spend a lot of time on my chapter titles because, one, they're this encapsulation of everything. So like in that opening chapter of Genesis, it's titled Property. The word property is also in the prose, but the whole chapter is about being property. This main character is literally owned as a item. Yeah. And so it encapsulates everything in this one word. And so I do spend a lot of time on my chapter titles and make sure that they're also somewhere in the narration, because I don't want to just have a chapter title that doesn't also tie in. And so, yeah. And that's my little cheat, because it's kind of that little thing.
So I had that little bit of flavor text at the top to just like say that a nobleman can do that. And then all I did was I just actually issued the sash deal.
Yeah.
And then described the action. Nobody needs to know what the history behind it is. Nobody needs to know that you can only challenge down the ladder, not up the noble ladder. Doesn't matter.
But see, and this is the thing.
Like, I know that it might come into play at some point because you can't challenge up the noble ladder.
Right.
But they'll deal with it when it gets there.
Right. And that's where you do it organically, because your narrating character already knows that. So it's like, I know my ears are round, so I'm not going to say that I tucked my hair behind my round ears. Yeah. It's the same thing. I know I can't challenge up, so I'm not going to even talk about it until it's like, did he just challenge up? But that's not, can we do that? That's not, no, we can't, no, that's not. And then it's this, moment that we can actually explore and do and have fun with. Or, the other way is I would challenge you if I could. Yeah. Or why are you goading him so much? Like, he's your superior. Why? Because I can't challenge him. And I'm just going to piss him off until he finally freaking challenges. Like, there's just so many organic ways that we can get this into the story without just, and again, all info dumps are bad. All of them. Yeah. So you run into this catch-22. It's like, oh, well, I've got to introduce world building. How do I do that if I can't just info dump world building. Well, that's the rub. That's the difference between a really good writer and one who isn't quite as good, because you're just using this crutch of info dumping to dump this crap on that isn't interesting, that I don't care about, and you're not pushing yourself to figure out the organic ways to do it. When it comes down to it, what we do is hard. It isn't easy. It's easy just to write. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, and I haven't written them in a couple of years, I need to get back to them, but it's one of the reasons why I used to love writing romance. And this isn't an insult. There are some complex romance stories. Mine are not. I write them in first person. I write them in single character. They are very linear stories. I write what's called sweet romance. So it's all about the kiss at the end. That's really, my wife hates this joke, but I always say after that first kiss, everything is downhill. So I don't want to write about that anyway. Like, it's all about the first kiss. And so all of my romance, they're kind of vacations for me. They're only 70, 80,000 words versus 180 to 200,000 words. So like, there are these little vacations that I can take away from the harder, where everything matters and everything. But that's also the difference in understanding the readership. Readers of fantasy are the hardest readers to please because we are the most picky. You screw up, we will crucify you and stone you and spit on you and do horrible things to you. Romance readers are literally the most forgiving readers of any genre, because all they care about is, do you give me the gushy feeling inside? Do you give me what I'm looking for? I don't care if your characters suck and two-dimensional and your writing sucks and you don't know grammar and you speak good no English and all of that stuff. As long as I get the gushy feeling that I'm looking for, all the rest of that stuff I don't care about. Not that I write poorly when I'm writing my romance. I think my romance is really well written. I just don't have to put the level of effort into it that I have to put into, I'll do 3 or 4 rewrites before I'm finished and consider that ready to go and be published on my romance, where, it's 10 to 12 for my epic fantasy, because it's so all consuming and so all just everything has to be right.
I think the key takeaway in this is, don't info dump. Dear God, please don't info dump. And whatever you're using, you can only use it to resolve conflict to the extent where the reader understands it, which also means to the extent where you understand it.
Yes, you definitely do have to understand this stuff. But let's go one step further, because I don't think we've given enough information. Because the other thing is, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we thread this stuff in organically? For me, one of the things that I think is the number one missed thing in up and coming writers is dialogue. And I don't mean the dialogue itself. They, and again, last night, this was a big thing. And I ended up writing OP, which means it's short from my shorthand editing for opportunity. They write dialogue sequences that are just talking heads. It's just quote, dialogue, quote, or quote, dialogue he said, quote, dialogue she said, quote, dialogue he said, quote, dialogue. And, maybe pages. They go, just for pages of that. And maybe they're like, oh, no, it says he said angrily. I'm like, okay, that literally still doesn't show me anything. So it's one of the reasons why I'm such a huge fan of what I call action tags. When we talking about speech tags, the definition of speech tag is the tag that we put onto dialogue to let the reader know who just said that or who is about to say that. So I could write, John said, hey, how you doing? Or hey, how you doing? In quote, John said. And those are speech tags. They both tell the reader who said, hey, how you doing? But they do nothing other than that. That's all they do. So what an action tag is, and an action tag doesn't have to be action. It's a little misleading. An action tag. So when we're thinking about, and we're getting into grammar here, when we're thinking about sentence structure and paragraph structure specifically, in a paragraph, what a paragraph is like information. So if we're in prose and we're in a dialogue scene, then one paragraph is one character's words and actions. So instead of writing John said, hey, how you doing? Or, hey, how you doing? John said, we could write John walked into the room and as per his usual, sat in the largest, most comfortable chair in the coffee house. Hey, how you doing? We know, because it's all one paragraph, we know who said, hey, how you doing? Because we're giving actions for John, but we're also world building. You know, and again, I'm making all this up all off the top of my head, so it's not good. I'm not writing well here. I'm just using this as an example that you know, we're in a coffee house. Oh, there's different chairs because one of them is larger and more comfortable than any others. We're also giving insight into the character that John always takes the most comfortable chair. So not only am I, look at all that information that I just gave to the reader in an action tag. It's a part of the dialogue. It's a part of that. It's one of the reasons why, and this sounds really mundane when I say it, and I hate saying this, but it works brilliantly in execution. But it's one of the reasons why, if I've got a lot of information to give to the readers, it's always over, and it's going to be dialogue. It's always over a meal.
Yeah.
Because it's natural. It gives me tons of things to play with. I can really have all of these props that, you know, because you can cut stuff and putter stuff and pass stuff and pour stuff and spill stuff and tip stuff and drink stuff and eat stuff and nibble stuff. And like, there's all this stuff you can do during a meal, in addition to all the other body language, like facial features and hand gestures and body posture and breath intakes and, you know, eye rolls and all this other stuff that we can do that also lends to adding depth to the characters, adding depth to the environment, adding depth to everything. And so, you know, all of these opportunities when you just have two people talking, and it's just because when you just do dialogue, even, you know, he said, she said, what you really are doing is you're painting two lips that are hovering in the air, and they're just working back and forth as words are coming out of these lips, and that's it.
And I found myself doing a lot of talking heads at the beginning of writing. And now that I'm in my second book, especially, like, I think there's still parts of it in the first book where it's a bit talking heads, but now I watch for it like a hawk.
Yeah.
The more I read, the more I'm like, this is bad. I'm so done reading about these two people jabbering at each other. I'm just over it now.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why I have the rule that if I have a line of dialogue that's by itself, it's usually short. It's always something that you absolutely know who said it. And I limit myself to one every only couple pages.
So I will say there is one exception. Like if you have a character who's telling a monologue story, like the character is infodumping to the other character for some reason. So
I agree, except for I will also say, don't do that. I mean,
how do you so I'm thinking specifically, I have a scene where I have a character who is telling about an event that happened in the past. Like they're literally retelling to another character something the reader doesn't know and this character doesn't know. They're telling the story of what happened.
In the third book of the Genesis saga, I do these prologues, not in the first book, but in the second and third, where you're actually in the bad guys moment. It's the only time I let the readers in on that. And in the third book, you're actually with this really evil god, and he's describing how magic came to this world and basically created the 12 gods of man. He's one of the 12 gods of man, and he's telling this mortal that's his right-hand man kind of the story. He's reminiscing about it.
Yeah.
And you're right, you're going to have moments like that. But here's a couple things that I love about that scene. First of all, it's told from the mortal's perspective. I never let you inside the head of an immortal. I don't want to write that. That's just something I'm against. But this immortal is insane and has killed. Matter of fact, there's already a story that you've read where that guy becomes the second in command.
Yeah.
Because he watches the god use a broken chair leg to beat the skull in of his last boss. Like, I'm third in charge, you're second in charge, and I get to watch you get your head bashed in as little bits of your skull and brain are actually hitting me while I'm watching this insane god beat you to death. And so it's, you know, this guy's not stable. And now you're in this environment where you've delivered some bad news, and the bad news is what prompts this god to kind of reminisce about it. So you're in this head of a character that you want this information because you're dying. I mean, you're power hungry, and the more information you get, the better. So you've got the motivation for why he's there, but you've also got the terror of, at any time this guy could kill me and there's nothing I can do about it. And also, it allowed me to give depth into the character because he's really reminiscing to himself. He's not actually telling the story to the other character, the main character, the POV character, Samlin. He's not telling it to Samlin. He's actually telling it to himself, and kind of just, he's in that nostalgic moment for just a second. And so it's about, again, and the reason why I did all this is these are organic things that I thought about of how can I make this scene interesting, make it compelling, make it tension filled. So you've got constantly the threat of dying, because you never know when you talk to this guy if he's going to kill you or not. You've got the power hungry motivation. You've got, I'm inside Samlin's head, so there's a lot of him thinking about what he's hearing and trying to extrapolate even more information off of what he knows, because this happened thousands of years ago, and so he wasn't alive back then. No one was alive back then except for these 12 gods of man. He's learning this stuff, and it's opening up this kind of mindset that the readers don't get anywhere but here. And so again, it's just thinking about all of this stuff and why we're doing it, and it still isn't an info dump as far as like, sit down, Sam. Let me tell you.
No, so but what I'm driving at is like, that is one character who. So in the case where I'm thinking, where I did this, it's not an info dump, but it is one character talking for
certainly
paragraphs.
But you have to then break it up and make it interesting. Another one, also in the third book, the lion dude he's never met one of his own kind before until the third book. It's the first time he ever meets another lion dude. And it's this really old lion dude. And so, he's religious, and religious in their religion, which he's never even heard. He was taken before he even hit 2 weeks of age. So he knows nothing of his culture. So I have this beautiful scene where this old lion dude is waxing all philosophical about religion and their lion god, because they don't worship the 12 gods of man and all this other stuff, and kind of like the way they are, their tribes are set up and their clans are set up and everything like that. And it's much more of a, you're gonna have to know this stuff because you're getting ready to go into our territory. You're about to walk into this stuff that you need to know this information. But it's still a conversation. It's still interesting. It's still interrupted with emotions and thoughts and questions, and it's very interactive. Much different than the Samlin scene, because the Samlin scene, he doesn't open his mouth. He doesn't ask questions of the god. He's like, oh, could you explain that a little more detail, sir? Like, because he's terrified also at the same time as he's also drooling over this powerful information that he's gaining that could help him out, in his career. But he's silent. He is not. He doesn't even want the god to remember that he's there. And so it's a much different conversation as opposed to this other conversation. Both are doing the same thing. They're both technically, if you want to really go loosely with the term, they're both info dumps. But they're not. And so it's about looking for ways to make them very interesting and very, organic
and impactful to the reader. Because if the reader cares about the MC who's getting the information, or the MC who's giving the information, but if they care about that, then they will care about the conveyance, as long as you keep it interesting to that MC as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's about grounding them in that narrating character.
Yeah.
Period. It all comes down to that. If you make me care about the character, then everything they care about, I will by default care about, because you've made me care about that. I care that they learn this knowledge. I care that they get this information. I care that they're doing whatever they're doing, because I care about them. Yeah. If you fail to ground me in the character and connect me to that character and make me care about that character, then you fail in all aspects of storytelling. It's pretty simple.
And I think that is a great note on which to end this episode.
All right. Sounds good.
Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Vella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.
Hi guys, this is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.